Hello there, my friends. It's me again, along with all my fellow knife monsters, welcoming you to another episode of Philomania. Today, as you can already see right here on the table, we've got something special. This time, it's not just a knife, it's a Spyderco, and right next to it, in this little case, we've got a brand new set of titanium scales that we're going to install on it. Now, let's get straight to the point. This is not going to be a full-on review. Instead, this video is all about a modification I've been wanting to do, upgrading a knife that's incredibly well known among collectors, the Spyderco Paramilitary 3. And these scales, they've just arrived. They're beautifully crafted titanium, made in the USA, and I can't wait to see how they transform this knife. Here's the thing, this is actually my very first Paramilitary 3. So while we do the swap, I'll also be sharing my very first impressions of the model. Now, as expected, it comes in that classic Spyderco packaging, simple, sturdy, and inside you'll find a small booklet with details about the materials, the build, the warranty, the usual. And of course, this particular model is American-made, something we'll confirm together in a moment. As I mentioned, this is a knife with an almost legendary reputation in the pocket knife collecting world. You can find thousands of reviews of this exact model on YouTube, but for me, this is the first time I've ever held one in my own hands. And here's an interesting twist. I do have a Spyderco Paramilitary 2-inch in my collection, so I'm really looking forward to comparing the two. Believe it or not, the Paramilitary 2 is actually larger than the Paramilitary 3. You'd think it would be the other way around, right? A 2 should be smaller, and a 3 should be the bigger one. But nope, it's the opposite. In this case, the Paramilitary 3 is definitely the more compact knife. That said, it's practically identical to the Paramilitary 2-inch design. And since this is my very first time holding a Paramilitary 3-inch in my hands, I can honestly say the size feels just right. Everything I've read and watched about this model checks out. Just like in the countless reviews out there, this is indeed an incredibly versatile knife. Deployment is smooth and easy whether you use that signature Spyderco Spidey flick or simply work the large thumb hole that's such an iconic feature of the brand. Pretty much every Spyderco knife has it, and it's one of the things that makes them instantly recognizable. Now, to be completely honest, I do feel a little bad about replacing these factory scales. They're made of G10, a fiberglass reinforced laminate, and they've got a great texture that offers excellent grip in the hand. It's not slippery at all, even if your hands are a bit sweaty, which makes it a very secure handle material. But the whole point of today's video is to swap them out. And like I said before, this model isn't anything new for the knife collecting community. I just wanted to point out a little detail that I think is worth appreciating, and you might be able to see it right here if the camera catches it well. The blade is marked Golden, Colorado, USA, Earth, a distinctive touch found on every Spyderco Paramilitary, whether it's the 2 or the 3, proudly indicating that they're made in Colorado, USA. And you know that little detail where the blade says USA Earth? I think that's just awesome. It's not something you see every day, a product that actually lists Earth as its place of origin. I suppose in today's world, maybe that kind of marking will start becoming a bit more common, but for now, it's still pretty unusual and pretty cool. Now, moving on, let me show you the scales I've got stored in this pouch right here. I've already opened this set before, so this isn't a first look for me, but I really want you to appreciate just how stunning these scales are. They're also made in the United States, crafted by a company called RG Custom Metalworks, and the craftsmanship here is just spectacular. We're talking full titanium construction with a honeycomb pattern. The hexagonal cells are recessed, while the raised edges of each hexagon have a completely different surface finish. And yes, they are hexagons, just to be clear. Now, if you look closely, you'll notice that the raised sections aren't exactly mirror polished, but they're not fully satin either. They've got these fine, subtle lines running across them, giving the surface an almost brushed look without losing that premium feel. Here's the reverse side so you can see it as well. And of course, when it's time to install them, I'll be shooting a time-lapse so you can get a clear look at the entire process from removing the factory G10 scales to fitting these gorgeous titanium ones in place. Now, what's really interesting about these scales, aside from the fact that they're purely an aesthetic upgrade, is that they completely eliminate the lanyard hole. Personally, I'd rather do without it. By removing that hole, the pocket clip can now sit higher up on the handle. And that means that when the knife is clipped in your pocket, it rides deeper and is much more discreet. With the stock scales, that hole forces the clip a little lower, leaving more of the knife exposed above the pocket line. It's a small detail, but in the world of knife carry, small details make a big difference. Another feature I really like is that the titanium pocket clip on these scales has no visible screws on the outside. Instead, the mounting screw is hidden inside the handle. Along with the scales, the kit also comes with this replacement barrel spacer, this piece here, which will take the place of the factory one and integrate perfectly with the titanium handles. That spacer helps secure the knife's internal frame, keeping everything solid. I'll admit, part of me feels a little bad about taking apart a brand new Paramilitary 3, but I'm confident the end result is going to look absolutely stunning. Before we jump into the time-lapse installation though, I want to check the current weight. On the scale, the Paramilitary 3 comes in at exactly 3.4 ounces, that's about 95 grams. The new titanium scales weigh in at exactly 59 grams. And with the included button or lock component, we're looking at about actually closer to 61 grams total. In ounces, that's roughly 2.2 ounces. That's going to add a noticeable amount of weight to the knife, no doubt about it. But as I've mentioned before, and maybe you already know this about me, I actually love heavier knives. For me, a cutting tool like this benefits from the added mass. When you're making a cut, the weight of the knife itself helps you power through material with less effort. It's a simple but very real advantage. So I've got all the tools here that I'll need to disassemble and reassemble the Paramilitary 3. And as always, I'll be showing you the whole process in a time-lapse so you can watch the transformation from start to finish without sitting through every single screw turn in real time. And now, here it is, the knife with its brand new titanium scales fully installed. The first thing I can say is the feel is incredible. It's extremely comfortable in hand. The edges of these scales are chamfered, meaning they're rounded off, which makes the grip feel exceptionally smooth and ergonomic. Action-wise, deployment is just as good as you'd expect from the factory, which tells me that the scales were cut with absolute precision. The alignment is spot on, and the tolerances are perfectly dialed in. Everything is tight, solid, and exactly where it should be. As you can see, the blade is centered well, almost. It's just slightly leaning to the left. But that's an easy fix, and it's exactly what I'm going to do next. That's the final step before wrapping up this installation, making the last fine adjustments. Before I get to that though, I'm going to clean things up a bit. For reference, the pivot screw here is a T10 Torx, so keep that in mind if you ever plan to work on your own Paramilitary 3. The scale screws are T8 Torx. That's it. Those are the only two sizes you'll need for this job. So, the plan is to bring the blade back to dead center. Like I said, it's just slightly off to the left. We're talking less than a millimeter, but as a knife nerd, I want it to be perfect. To do that, I'll loosen the pivot screw, apply a small amount of Loctite, and then retighten it to the exact spot I want. The Loctite will keep it from working loose over time with regular use. And here's where I made a bit of a mess. I accidentally put on way too much. Look at this. It's supposed to be just a tiny drop, and I've basically globbed it on. Well, no big deal. I'll just clean it up. The important thing is that there's enough of that blue Loctite on the threads so that once the pivot is tightened down, it stays exactly where I want it. All right, after that little mess with the Loctite, let's get back to work. I've cleaned things up. The inside is still a bit messy, but it's just Loctite residue, nothing to worry about, and I'll make sure it's wiped down properly. right now, the pivot isn't even fully dialed in. When I say tuning, what I mean is finding that exact sweet spot where the action is perfectly smooth and fluid like it is right now, but without introducing any side-to-side blade play. At the moment, I've actually over-adjusted it slightly because there's just a tiny bit of horizontal movement when the blade is open. Not as much now since I've already tweaked it, but ideally, the knife should feel rock solid when locked open. The key is to make very small adjustments, and I mean very small. This pivot is one of the most sensitive I've ever worked with. Moving it less than a millimeter can make a very noticeable difference in both action and stability. That tells me the tolerances here are extremely tight, which is impressive from a machining perspective, but also a little frustrating for tuning. Because with a setup this precise, you can go from perfect action to over-tightened with just the slightest turn. I've already brought it to the point where there's no blade play at all, which is great, but I can still refine it just a touch more to get that ideal balance between smooth deployment and absolute lockup strength. There. Yeah, I think that might be it. That could be the sweet spot. Although I can still feel just a tiny bit of blade play when it's open, so when you're tuning a pivot like this, you've got to be patient. It's not something you can just rush through. It takes time to get it right. All right, I think we're there now. And here's something important to keep in mind, my friends. The way a knife tunes often depends a lot on how the scales are installed. When you're working with custom scales like these, the maker needs to have extremely precise CNC machining capabilities. We're talking about equipment that can cut and shape extremely hard materials like steel and titanium with micrometer-level accuracy. That's because, as you've seen here today, even a difference of less than a millimeter can completely change the action and lockup of the knife. Now, not all pivots are created equal. Some give you a lot more room to fine-tune, but this particular Paramilitary 3 doesn't have that flexibility. It's a relatively older design, so it's not like the newer models with more refined pivot systems. Personally, I prefer pivots that only have a screw on one side and a fixed threaded insert on the other. It makes the whole tuning process simpler. But in this case, as you can see, we've got a screw on both sides, which means you also have to factor in adjustments to the opposite side as well. Fortunately, I've already mapped out exactly how this one behaves, so I know what to tweak to get it just right. And now, it's right where it should be. As you can see, the blade is centered. To my eyes, it still leans ever so slightly to the left, but that's just me being picky. For most people, it would look perfectly centered. We also have to remember that this is a brand new knife with brand new titanium scales. Over time, as it gets used, it will break in. That means that repeated opening and closing, whether it's a thumb flick, a Spidey flick, or simply closing it by hand, will naturally wear in the parts and help the tolerances settle into the state they were originally designed for. That process can take a few days or even a week, depending on how much you use the knife. And once it's fully broken in, if you're still not completely satisfied with the centering, you can do a final tune-up at that point. But that will be a topic for a future review. For today, this was all about the installation me and all my knife monsters out there putting these beautiful titanium scales onto the Paramilitary 3. So, what comes next is a proper review of the knife, but only after it's fully broken in. I want to carry it in my pocket, use it for cutting tasks, and spend enough time with this little guy to really understand how it performs in day-to-day use. That's when I'll be able to give you my honest thoughts on the real-world functionality of this beautiful Spyderco Paramilitary 3 and, of course, on these titanium scales. Because, believe it or not, these scales are actually more expensive than the knife itself. Sometimes dressing up your knife can turn into a significant investment. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as you're happy with the results, both in terms of looks and build quality. But above all, it's critical that the scales meet proper tolerances. At the end of the day, this is still a sharp tool, and if it's not constructed properly, it could cause injury. You don't want a poor fit leading to an accident. All right, my friends, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. From all my fellow knife monsters and myself, I wish you a great week ahead. We're recording this on the 28th of June, 2025. These are turbulent times in the Middle East, and things are also tense in the United States. So I'd like to remind everyone to stay calm, focus on harmony with your loved ones, and tune out all the noise and nonsense out there that's not worth your energy. Peace to all, and I'll see you in the next episode. Ciao, 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 ciao.